Good evening, boys and girls. It's time to read again from the Jesus Storybook Bible, and tonight we're going to read about Jonah and the return of the exiles. God had a big job for Jonah, but Jonah didn't want it. "Go to Nineveh," God said, "and tell your worst enemies that I love them." "No," said Jonah. "Those are bad people doing bad things." "Exactly," said God. "They have run far away from me, but I can't stop loving them. I will give them a new start. I will forgive them." "No," said Jonah, "they don't deserve it." "I'll run away," Jonah said to himself. "Far away, so far away that God won't be able to find me. Then I won't have to do what God says. That's a good plan," he said, because as far as he knew, it was a good plan. But of course it wasn't a good plan at all. It was a silly plan, because you can run away from God, but he will always come and find you. Jonah went ahead with his not very good plan. "One ticket to not Nineveh, please," he said, and boarded a boat sailing in the very opposite direction of Nineveh. Well, it wasn't long before a fierce wind blew, and the boat started to lurch and pitch and roll, and everyone started turning green. Jonah sat bolt upright in his bed. You see, the first thing that went wrong with Jonah's not very good plan was that God sent a big storm after him. The sailors couldn't sail their ship properly. "We're sinking," they screamed, and started throwing everything overboard, suitcases, food, whatever they could find. By now, Jonah knew the storm was his fault. "Throw me in instead," he shouted at the sailors, "and the storm will stop." The sailors weren't sure. "It's the only way you can be saved," Jonah cried. And so, 1, 2, 3, splash. No sooner had Jonah hit the water than the waves grew calm, and the wind died down, and the storm stopped. Just then, when Jonah thought it was all over, when he was sure he was going to drown, God sent a big fish to rescue him. The fish swallowed Jonah whole with one big gulp. Jonah must have thought he'd died. It was so dark in there, like a tomb. But then he smelled the rotting food and felt the slimy seaweed and knew that he wasn't dead. He was in the belly of the fish. Sitting there in the darkness for 3 whole days, Jonah had plenty of time to think. Pretty soon he realized his plan was, well, a very silly plan indeed. He was sorry for running away. He prayed to God from inside the great fish and asked God to forgive him. After 3 days, the fish spat Jonah safely out onto a sandy beach. And just then, Jonah heard someone calling his name. "Go to Nineveh," God said. And this time, Jonah said, "Yes." And he went straight to Nineveh and told everybody God's wonderful message. "Even though you've run so far from God, he can't stop loving you," Jonah said. "Run to him, and he'll forgive you." The people of Nineveh listened to Jonah, and they started loving God. They learned to do what God said and to stop running away from him, just like Jonah. Many years later, God was going to send another messenger with the same wonderful message. Like Jonah, he would spend 3 days in utter darkness. But this messenger would be God's own Son. He would be called the Word because he himself would be God's message. God's message translated into our language. Everything God wanted to say to the whole world in a person. Have you ever been to a party that lasted a whole week? How about a sermon that went on all day? Well, that's what happened to God's people after they came home from being slaves. They'd forgotten how God wanted them to live or who they were supposed to be. So Ezra and Nehemiah read them the rules God had given Moses. But something odd happened. The more the sermon went on, the sadder they got. Why? Was the sermon that boring? No, not really. It was strange, you see. As Ezra read the book of rules, it worked like a mirror. It showed them what they were like, and they didn't like what they saw. They saw that they had not been living the way they should. They saw that they were cruel and selfish. "We've blown it," they cried. "Now God will punish us." They thought they knew what God was going to do, but they didn't. Of course, they might have picked up a clue from Ezra's name, which means help is here, and an even stronger one from Nehemiah's name, because his name means God wipes away our tears. And that, as you'll see, is just exactly what God was getting ready to do. Ezra looked at God's children, and great hot tears were welling up in their eyes and streaming down their cheeks. He stopped his sermon mid-sentence, and he shut the book. "We're having a party," he shouted. So that's what they did, all week long. "God wants us to be happy," Ezra said. All day they listened to stories about the wonderful things God had done for his people, how he made the world, how he gave a special promise to Abraham, how he rescued them from slavery, how he spoke to Moses and showed them how to live, how he brought them to a special land, how he rescued them, no matter what, time after time, over and over again, because of his never stopping, never giving up, unbreaking, always and forever love. They remembered how God had always been, always through all the years, loving his children, keeping his promise to Abraham, taking care of them, forgiving them, even when they disobeyed, even when they ran away from him, even when they thought they didn't need him. Then God told his children something more. "I can't stop loving you. You are my heart's treasure, but I lost you. Now I'm coming back for you. I am like the sun that gently shines on you, chasing away darkness and fear and death. You will be so happy. You'll be like little calves running free in an open field. I'm going to send my messenger, the promised one, the one you have been waiting for, the rescuer. He is coming, so get ready." It had taken centuries for God's people to be ready. But now the time had almost come for the best part of God's plan. God himself was coming. Not to punish his people, but to rescue them. God was getting ready to wipe away every tear from every eye, and the true party was just about to begin.